Can you still game at 1080p on a GPU as old as this? The R9 280X is 11 years old in 2024, but does that mean it can't play games even at a resolution as low as 1080p? Well, stick around to find out because this old graphics card still has quite a few tricks up its sleeve. Well, I said the R9 280X is 11 years old, but it's also kind of 13 years old because essentially it's just a rehashed 7970. Is it 7970? Yes, it is a 7970 from 2011. So it shares the exact same silicon, and if AMD were to rehash graphics cards like this in 2024, I think not a lot of people would appreciate that. But back to the R9 280X, and back in its time, it was a relatively decent graphics card. It had 3GB of GDDR5 memory, which still is probably not enough in 2024. Well, it's definitely not enough for 1080p, but back then it was quite a bit of VRAM, and it was designed to compete with graphics cards like the GTX 770 and even in some games the GTX 780. And the biggest benefit of a graphics card like this over those Kepler ones is it supports DirectX 11.1 at a feature level, which means games like God of War will start and run, and I'll benchmark that today as well. But still, the R9 280X doesn't support DirectX 12 at a feature level, and it hasn't been supported by AMD for like 2 years at this point, so a lot of modern games still won't run on this graphics card. It will just run more than like a Kepler graphics card, for instance. But how does this unsupported GPU get on in 2024? To find out, I've tested it at 1080p in my Ryzen 5 7600 testing PC, which has it doesn't have 64GB. It has 32GB of 6200 MHz CL32 DDR5 memory, a 2TB Western Digital NVMe Gen 4 SSD, and an MSI X670E Tomahawk. I've left the R9 280X at its stock out of the box settings on the OC BIOS, so that's 1100 MHz on this Gigabyte WindForce model, and I've also used the latest official AMD driver, as in the past the NIMS drivers haven't really done that much for R9 graphics cards. With that being said, let's see how it gets on. I decided to go easy on the R9 280X at the start with Fortnite on the Performance API. As we know, this API on Fortnite is pretty easy to run on basically any GPU, and that counts a day for this graphics card, because 288 FPS on average with a fairly mediocre 1% low for Fortnite means the R9 280X is certainly capable of giving a very competitive frame rate in Fortnite Battle Royale. So just keep it to the Performance API and you'll be golden on an older R9 GPU. Flipping this on its head, performance in Cyberpunk 2077 was better than what I was expecting, but it's still not really that ideal. The performance is very similar to an Xbox One, and that's the type of experience you'll be getting with 32 FPS on average and a 1% low of 26. Is this playable? Yeah, kind of, but is it ideal? Definitely not. And that trend continues with Spider-Man Remastered on the very low preset. 35 FPS on average and 24 FPS for the 1% low means, just like Cyberpunk, yes, it's playable, but is it ideal? Definitely not. But the fact that the older R9 even started Spider-Man is a big win in my opinion. So if you really needed to play this game and get like a PS4 level experience, I mean, it certainly is possible. On the launch version of The Witcher 3, the R9 280X wouldn't have had a problem, but with the newer enhanced edition, it doesn't struggle, I'll be honest, but 52 FPS on the medium preset isn't the best experience in the world. Yes, it's pretty decent and I'd consider this playable, but that 1% low at 39 isn't the best what we've seen from this game, so there is that. But with some settings tweaking, I think you can get this game above 60 FPS pretty easily, and definitely the 3GB of VRAM certainly helps out. From my time testing older GPUs, it seems God of War actually is quite nice to older graphics cards, particularly older AMD ones, and to be fair, 49 FPS on average with a 1% low of 40 today means the R9 280X is pretty playable. You could probably put this on the original preset and get a very similar PS4 level type experience, but you're rendering at native 1080p here, so that is a big benefit of PC gaming. But you get to choose, and that's another benefit of PC gaming. So yeah, God of War, not that bad. Performance in Counter-Strike 2 is definitely acceptable, with 152 FPS on average and a very solid 1% low at 120. If you had a relatively decent CPU here, you could get away with a competitive 144Hz experience in Counter-Strike. So in all fairness, on the R9 280X, not a bad showing. If this was CSGO, you probably would have got more frame rate, but Valve released CS2 for basically no reason and made it much harder to run, even though it doesn't really look that much better. And last up is Skyrim Special Edition. This 2016 remaster or definitive edition, I suppose, of Skyrim runs quite well on the R9 280X. You're set for a very solid 60 FPS experience for both the average frame rate and the 1% low, as this game is capped at 60 FPS. Therefore, you won't be having any problems in Skyrim with an older graphics card like this. All in all, for an upper mid-range graphics card from around 2013-ish, the R9 280 has put up a surprisingly decent fight in the games tested today. Yes, when you look at the AAA games, it's far from ideal, as you will be stuck to low settings and 30 FPS like in the case of Cyberpunk and Spider-Man, but to be honest, this is something I was expecting. And the fact that it doesn't have DirectX 12 feature support or any modern drivers means a lot of newer games, despite how well they'd run regardless, they wouldn't be that good on a graphics card like this. Like Jedi Survivor and titles like that, you've got no chance on a GPU like this. Conversely, esports games is where graphics cards like this shine, and that the R9 280X does, because in Fortnite, Rainbow Six Siege and Counter-Strike 2 today, I'd say you're easily set for a 144Hz 1080p experience, and in the case of Fortnite, maybe a 240Hz there would suit you quite well. Of course, the esports games are going to run fine on this graphics card. The developers purposely make the games very easy to run so more people are able to play their games. It's no coincidence that they are like the most played games on PC, especially with like CS. That's probably the most played game on Steam right now, so it's good that the R9 280X can do that. And the R9 280's great performance is also translated to older games. Yes, this wasn't so much of a unknown, I'd like to say, because Skyrim Special Edition isn't really hard to run. The same goes for Halo Master Chief Collection and maybe even The Witcher 3, even though that's an old game that had a massive update a couple of years ago which made it much harder to run. So it's good that the R9 280X can still run The Witcher 3 pretty decently. So for a super budget retro graphics card, or even for a budget esports machine, the R9 280X isn't that bad if you don't really mind its 250 watt TDP, because that's a lot of power for the performance you're going to be getting. So, for the £25 you can find one of these for, it isn't the worst deal in the world, in my opinion. Yes, new AAA games, if they even run, won't be that good. You'll be stuck to low with 30 FPS, maybe 40 FPS at the best. But to be honest, if you're expecting more than that out of this graphics card, it's just not going to happen, because it's an 11-year-old GPU, which was like an upper mid-range graphics card, or maybe even low on the high end. So expecting it to perform really well in something like Cyberpunk in 2024 is just definitely not on the cards. On the other hand, if you're after a GPU which is pretty decent in esports titles and is very good in older, more retro-y games, the R9 280, from the data I've gathered today, is, well, it's pretty good for the job, what can I say? But I do have to tell you though, I did see an R9 290X for around £35 on the same site you can get these for 25 quid. So that might be a much better buy. The 290X is more equivalent to a RX 570. So it's quite a bit more powerful than this, but it still suffers from the lack of DirectX 12 feature level support and the updated drivers, so that has to be known. But if you want to see a graphics card which is a bit more modern and it will basically run every single game out there, you can watch that GPU up there. With that being said, I'll catch you in the next one.